Welcome to today's episode of Talent Strategy 60. I'm here. Yeah, there we go. That's what happens when we go live. I already screwed things up. So yay me. It's a professional operation we're running over here. I am your friendly neighborhood talent strategy nerd, Dr. Jim, and today we are in for a phenomenal episode. And the topic is going to be on designing and launching impactful DEI programs. So in this episode, we're going to learn a lot of key items in the course of the discussion. We're going to get a good understanding of what the current state of DEI programs looks like. So we're going to have a landscape discussion there. We're going to learn how and where DEI programs go wrong. And then the meat of the discussion is going to be focused on best practices from a design and launch perspective, as well as making DEI an evergreen part of your organizational culture. So there's a lot of ground to cover. And the intent here for Nathan and I, my perpetually well-coiffed co-host, is to deliver a conference quality level discussion. And in order to do that, we've brought on some of the strongest DEI practitioners that I have in my network to carry the conversation and to facilitate those intros so the audience can actually learn a little bit more about these folks before we dive into the discussion. Mm-hmm. I'll hand it off to my illustrious co-host, Nathan Ross, to do the introductions, and then we'll get rolling with the show. Nathan, take it away.
Absolutely. We do have a very talented panel of guests for the show today. We have Charles, Maya, and Jiquanda here. And just starting out, Charles, just wanted to hear a little bit more about your background. And if you could just tell the guests of the show what makes you tick and just some of your specialties as well. Why don't you kick us away?
Thank you, Dr. Jim and Nathan. Hello, world. I am Charles Campbell. I am an education executive. I've been in the game for over 27 years, so I hope I don't look as grizzled as my years in the industry might allude to you. But you name it, I've done it, from everything from substitute teacher to English teacher, science, assistant principal. I've had the privilege of working in the district office and even the board office, primarily within the Chicago Public School District and the suburbs of Chicago. But I currently work for a national organization where I'm the national place-based director for Teton Science Schools. And what that is we provide professional development services for primarily rural schools across the country who are interested in either new school design, redesign, or curriculum overhaul using the place-based model approach. And with that, one of our core tenets is culturally responsive pedagogy. And for me, it's about not just, making sure that people are represented and cultures are represented, but how do in education, if you have a homogenous population or a demographic, what are you doing to expose them to other thoughts, other perspectives, other learnings? And that's where I often find that we come up short in education, and that's what drives me.
Perfect. Charles, thank you so much for sharing that background. Maya, I want to kick it over to you. Just if you want to tell everyone a little bit about your story and your background and what brings you to the panel today.
Awesome. Thank you, Nathan. Hello, everyone. Excited to be here. Always a pleasure to hang with Dr. Jim yet again. Yes, my name is Maya Winston. I am currently in Dallas, Texas, and I am the Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Leader at a technology startup here in Dallas. Excited about the work that we are doing and learning how to work together and be a culturally competent organization that is leveraging the skills, backgrounds, and stories of everyone that decides to bring their time and talents through our doors. And before that, I was with a Fortune 100 company working in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and have been in some way, shape, or form doing DEI work since I was in college. I am originally from South Central Los Angeles, born and raised, educated, and priced out, and have made my way to Dallas and learning a bit more about what it really means to live into actual diversity, equity, and inclusion work and not just say you're doing it, because performative is usually the order of the day. Or people do the bare minimum and then want to get, participation trophies for it. And that's not actually changing anything or changing the outcomes or making the world that we live in more inclusive. I'm excited to be here and excited to engage with the esteemed colleagues on the panel today.
Absolutely. Happy to have you here. Happy to have you here, Maya. And Jiquanda, how about you enlighten the people with your background as well?
Yes, thank you so much. I too am very eager and enthusiastic to be here. I am always excited when I'm able to share the work that I'm doing, but also learn from folks in the space. So thank you for inviting me. I'm Jaquanda Nelson. I'm CEO of Diversity Window. We are a technology organization where we believe data comes first, and we help organizations use data to drive their action and their goals around diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and belonging. My journey has been probably like a lot of DEI practitioners, where many of us were doing this work before it became a thing or before we even called it diversity, equity, and inclusion. I had the opportunity to have a conversation with LV. Hey, V, we see you, Lawrence Brown, around this on he and Dr. Jim's podcast around kind of my own personal journey. And really it all stemmed from my experience of being the only Black student in a gifted program in elementary school growing up. And and I love to share that because while nothing was on fire, no one called me the N-word, I didn't have these big experiences, I always had this feeling of not feeling like I belonged. And now that I'm older and have the language, is because I was the only, the other, or the different, right? And so just really wanting to bring that with me as I went through all of my spaces, like Maya in college, and things I participated in high school. And I did some community organizing, and it really just was around how do we bring voices to the space to show up better, and to make sure everybody feels like they belong. And so that's been my journey, and I've been able to do it in many industries and organizations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also workforce development. So how do we think about, as we're trying to diversify, most of the time leadership, because that's where the gaps are in organization, as we're trying to diversify in our organizations, how do we also make that connections to the communities in which we serve and break down barriers? And we'll talk about barriers later, barriers for people to have opportunities in all of our spaces. And so that's my journey. And again, just thank you for having me.
So everyone's going to have to bear with me while I nerd out a little bit, and I'm squeeing internally here, as all of you have some great. This is my squee face. It's kind of like the rest of my face all the time, but you just just go with it. I'm super excited to have the conversation. Everybody on the panel brings so much context and texture into the conversation, so it's going to be a lot of fun, and hopefully by the end of the show, everybody that's listening is going to walk away with some actionable steps to take their DEI plan and their DEI vision and turn that into a reality, and not be performative. So with that being said, I want to dive into the discussion. So I know that we're going to try to be prescriptive towards the back end of the conversation in terms of some solutions and actions that organizations can put into play. But before we present any solutions, we need to understand the problem with respect to how DEI is currently being practiced or executed from all sorts of different lenses. And I think that's a perfect opportunity for Maya to kind of share what her experience has been, and we'll have a discussion around that. But when we are thinking about the current state of the DEI landscape, what have been your observations in terms of how it's currently thought of and how it's currently executed?
How is it currently thought of and executed? So first of all, it's currently thought of as, oh, we have to do it because everybody else is doing it. And we know that people are asking about it. So let's find, probably the highest ranking Black person on our staff. Hey, you are now the Chief Diversity Officer. What does that mean? We don't know, but you're here, and we're going to put you on the website, and we're going to give you this title. And here you go. No strategy, no resources or limited resources, not included within conversations, not given a strong budget, but told, we have you, enjoy until we decide we don't need you anymore. Or you have people who are given opportunities to come in and create diversity, equity, and inclusion programs within organizations, but there isn't a true understanding because it is the buzzword, it is the hot topic of inclusion. So we need to have it as a business imperative to at least show that we're making the effort while there actually is no action behind it. We're making the announced effort. And inside, okay, so now we have ERGs. We don't really know what ERGs are, but I guess they're kind of like clubs in high school. So book club, yeah, you're an ERG. Knitting club, you're an ERG too. Actually, you're not, but that's a whole separate thing. We're not going to give you a budget. Go ahead and bootstrap whatever it is within our multi-billion-dollar organization. We're not going to give you a budget. Go beg for speakers for free. We're not going to tie this into your learning and development plan. And we're going to say you have it, and we're going to put it all on the website. That is the sad fact of what is happening in a lot of organizations. That's not everybody's story. And I don't want to paint it all as negative at all. But for those who are on the performative side and quite simply jumping on the bandwagon of DEI, because it is the hot topic and it is the expectation of job seekers and for employees in the current corporate marketplace, that is what is happening. You have people who either have no background, who've never done it for free or otherwise, being put in charge of it. And it's performative is the nicest word I can call it. And then you have there being Tom in the comments. Appreciate you sharing that, which is very true. You have parts of DEI and the dimensions of DEI being skipped over, including age, including, family makeup. While it's not an obligation for people to share if they have family, like what considerations are being afforded for those who are taking care of a parent versus being a parent themselves, or the sandwich generation in between, or you're a foster parent. How does that factor into the benefits? You have people who are looking for companies who have benefits for trans folks who would like to be in a place where I don't have to fully disclose my whole medical history and life history to HR in order to qualify for benefits. How is the organization supporting people living in their true, authentic forms? And that really is that is how you have an effective program, is by focusing on the people and then tying it back to the business and making sure that they're working in concert instead of DEI being this auxiliary thing on the side that we just kind of do. And we keep it in HR because it's just for the people. It's not actually about the business. No, it is about your money, because you are running an effective business if you can have an effective DEI program that shows how you are correlating and integrating the core parts of honoring, respecting, and showing how people can make a difference within your organization and how that improves your bottom line.
Oh my God, there is so much gold in what you just said, Maya. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I know that Jiquanda and Charles have some additional context to add in here. But one of the things that stood out about what you just said to me was, there's still, sort of a broad view of diversity being sort of very narrow in terms of how it's defined. And that's one of the things that Nathan and I, and through our work in Circa, are hoping to change in terms of how diversity is viewed. So I think that's an important call out, one of many that you just shared out there, in terms of where organizations are kind of taking a check the box approach to DEI. And really, it doesn't serve you well, because people aren't dumb. People can figure it out if you're just, going through the motions. Now, Charles, you and I had a really interesting conversation a little while back when it came to, even how DEI is viewed, like diversity, equity, and inclusion is viewed as one thing. And one of the interesting things that you were talking about was Well, it's not one thing. It's like three separate things, and you need to define out like a plan, a strategic plan for each element. Share with the audience on how that prevailing wisdom, that it's just one thing, kind of stunts the efforts when it comes to making DEI more impactful in the workplace.
Absolutely. What I've learned in this work, in my current role, is kind of like what Maya said. She hit the bullseye, but around that bullseye, it ripples, and everybody encapsulate DEI as one thrust, one effort, one thought, when it's actually an acronym for three distinct purposes, with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So then how do you meld that into your mission? How do you meld this into your vision? And from that standpoint, how does it become your culture? And that's where I often see, especially in the educational world, where we fall short, because it becomes lopsided and couched into some type of racial thing or ethnic thing. And we're worried about how people perceive others' ethnic culture or ethnic mores. And we forget about all the other stuff, like Maya mentioned, about ageism, gender, you name it. It's about how do you make your person comfortable? Because, in leadership, managers who make people, who don't help their employees feel like they're of worth, or that they have a purpose and meaning, they're going to leave. And that's going to impact your bottom dollar. So that's what we're trying to work with in our organization, is how do we chop up diversity, equity, and inclusion into separate entities, but align each purpose or each meaning according to our vision and mission. And then once you do that, the key is don't spend time trying to train folks who don't understand Latinx culture, trying to convince them that, Latinx people have contributed to the world, or trying to convince some white folks that you're biased and all of that. No, I mean, it could be a part of it, but oftentimes we see in DEI work, that's where a lot of money and time is spent. You're grown, right? I don't have time to convince you about your biasness and stuff. What I need to convince you and show you what our intentional culture is at this organization, and how we expect people to go about the business of our work through the lens of a diverse perspective. How do we do our work in an equitable space internally, and how does that extend to our constituents? How we are inclusive of thoughts and perspectives that we didn't think about before or don't really care about, but how can we still make that a part of our growth?
That's fantastic stuff, Charles. And I think one of the things that stood out about what you just said was how it tied into Maya's point about don't make DEI a performative exercise. Because if you're being performative, you might get people in the door. As soon as they're inside the door and they see that you don't have anything from an inclusion perspective, anything from an equity perspective, anything from a belonging perspective, they're going to be out the door again. So you've created this sort of talent attraction hamster wheel, where you're bringing in diverse talent and they're just going right back out the door because you're only papering over the surfaces. So Jaquanda, I want to make sure that you have your say. I counted probably like 30 snaps when Charles and Maya were on. So I'd like you to come off of mute and really share some of your perspective in terms of the current landscape and how that can be impacted.
Yes, thank you. I love my snaps. I don't see the capability like in Zoom where you can like zoom off the thumbs up and the hearts and stuff. So everyone knows that's what the snaps are, okay? And I think I saw someone put a comment in about it. So, I mean, so much was said. I don't have anything really additionally that I could have said outside of what Maya and Charles said. I think I want to just make sure I'm calling out that It is absolute. Where the current state is, a lot of organizations are not making diversity, equity, and inclusion a business strategy. As Maya said, is a separate thing to do. You want to know how we know people aren't making it a business strategy? Because they don't have resources, like Maya said. It's a separate thing to do. There's no accountability. There's no clear goals, right? There's no clear direction. There's no measurement, right? There's no KPIs tied to it.
There's no funding.
There's no funding. Exactly. I actually was just having this conversation with a friend who, a colleague, we've been in this space for a while. And I said, you would never see in an organization where a finance or the finance function says our finance strategy is educating and bringing awareness to everyone within the organization. No, they're going to be very clear around, we are focused on financial sustainability. We are focused on financial growth. We are focused on protecting our financial status. And how we do that is by these targets, these timelines. We have projected growth through 2025, right? Very clear. And this is how we're going to, acquire that growth or, sustain the organization. And it's very much so. You have a finance team of people who have the background, who have the skills, who have the technical knowledge, right? We're not going to say, we have this big finance strategy, so let me go ask the marketing coordinator to own this, right? And that's typically what's happening with DEI. As Maya said, let's find that one passionate Black person in the organization who has been speaking up about it and also been scapegoated, right? Let's give them something to do to keep them quiet, but also check the box, right? And so the goal of DEI within organizations needs to be a strategy, a business operationalized strategy.
Fantastic stuff, and I know that Nathan is going to chime in. I just want to do a couple of things. So for those of you who are listening, make sure you're engaging and dropping the likes and hearts and ideas and all of that stuff when something that is said by this great group of panelists resonates with you, so that we can incorporate that into the conversation. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We'll make it as interactive as possible, but this is a phenomenal start and we're just getting going. So Nathan, I want you to keep the momentum going with our the next part of the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I know all of our guests have touched on it in their own way, but Charles, I just wanted to take a little bit deeper dive. I think it would make sense just to explore where you think DEI goes wrong with organizations and really call out some of those points so people can become more aware of some of the pitfalls when they are even just really early on in their DEI journey or just starting to move in that direction. Where do you think some of those, I don't know, off-putting points would be in that conversation?
I think it goes back again, let's start from the origin point of what Maya said. Either jumping on as a hot topic or jumping on board of this work out of fear. And unfortunately, with our organization, we got involved because of fear, because we started seeing great talent leaving because of some discrepancies between gender equity, right? So because of that, oh my goodness, we need to reevaluate our DEI process and save our talent pool. And it became like a rush job. So in this work, you have to be intentional. And what I think that has proven to be successful for us currently is at our organization at TSS, we pride ourselves on our intentional culture, right? So once you delve into this work, grant yourself some grace and time. Be thoughtful and intentional. Don't rush. When you rush, you're scrambling. You're not thinking with the right mindset. You're reacting versus being intentional and coming at it from an intervention standpoint and from a strategic standpoint. So we spent an inordinate amount of time of coaching up our board members to get them in a, how can I say, DEI mind state, to understand what some of the disconnects that were transpiring across the organization between them and then the organization. And then also during this time, we were experiencing change management, right, and leadership. I came on board. We brought on a new CEO. Then the CEO brought on some new senior leadership. So during this change, we were also having to educate other folks about what was happening and trying to build the plane as we were flying. That goes back to the idea of you have to be strategic. So in this work, we finally got things rolling where we are looking at, we spent too much time doing let's make this more intentional and devising a plan. And with that, don't spend too much time planning. At some point, you're going to have to execute. So we're in the execute mode of just testing out. But at the end of the day, like I mentioned before, we are very intentional now of not looking at it from a holistic standpoint of DEI being a ethnic racial thing, but really breaking down the tenets of how does this look like from a diverse standpoint? How do we apply this in an equitable state? How are we inclusive of the dynamics of our constituency and our internal members?
No, all very good points, Charles. I mean, I do feel like this isn't a journey that can just be rushed into. And there needs to be, like you said, that thought, that intention, coaching, and just a baseline education, really. Maya, I wanted to kick it back over to you just to hear a little bit more of your insights about where you feel there might be some missteps with an organization starting out in their DEI journey.
So yeah, to Charles's point and call outs, folks doing too much with too little. Let's start here. Coming in the door, oh, we have a DEI person. Oh, basically wave your wand and diversify everything in 6 months and get us on everybody's list. And that's not how it works. And I see someone put in the comments, didn't happen overnight. We're not going to change it overnight. When I first got into the role that I'm currently in, I was very intentional about my first 90 days. As a new organization, had to learn who are your key players, what's happening around here. You got to own your mess. If it stinks in here, don't think I'm coming in here with some Febreze and that's going to fix the problem. No, we need to find the source. We need to identify it. We need to clean it up. We may need to disinfect, remove things that are consistently causing the issue, and then develop a plan to keep it clean and to move forward. So my first order of business was honestly to observe. My first 30 days were observation. I need to learn who's doing what, see what the feel is. When, old real world tagline was when people stop being polite and start being real, give them that 30 days. After 2 weeks, you're not so cute anymore. So they'll start talking to you like you've been there for a while. And it's important to see that, to also get the experience of people who've been within the organization, to talk to people one-on-one, informally. What is your experience? What, if you could change something, learning those things. Then to assess the organization, see where they are in the data, and pair your quantitative with your qualitative data to make sure that you are having those informed decisions and solutions that will come in that last 30 days of your 90 days, so that you can start putting forth recommendations to start building a strategy that is going to help. I don't know how many people are actually doing that or given the space and opportunity to do that. I don't know how many people are truly, when they're appointed to be, DEI person, how many people are given the data or given access to the people who own the data, or if they're being told, oh, you don't need that. Just go, do something else or figure it out or go ask a question, versus it's being, no, this is real business. This is real work also. This is not just, Cinco de Mayo tacos and Fried chicken during Black History Month. Like, don't do me. No, it is far greater than that. I need data because I'm doing actual analysis because this ties back to the business. And again, it goes back into how many people are being afforded the resources and the access within their own organizations to make the changes, to look at the strategies. And then how many are given the grace to say, no, if we are at 25% women, we're not going to jump to 50% women in the next 60 days. And don't set me up for failure by having some outrageous type of goal like that. And then if I fail, then they're looking at you like, well, what do you do? Like, you're supposed to be the DEI person. Go find us some more people. What have you been doing to get the people that you are currently bringing in the organization? What ponds are you fishing in as far as your talent? Are you willing to switch that up? Are you willing to invest in other areas? Are you willing to show up in different places that make you uncomfortable so that you can actually learn and see what different could look like and what talent could be possible to bring in the door? Are you willing to grow the talent? Especially on the tech side, everybody wants ready-made employees to come in the door. Sometimes you need to grow those folks. But in doing that, you can also develop a very loyal employee base, as well as a even better reputation for being an organization that helps to grow and to build people and to help give the skills, the talent, and the experience to those who traditionally are left out in the cold. So again, I don't know how many people are being given the opportunity to make those type of changes or even make those type of recommendations to make those moves within their organizations. But if they're not, those are major missteps.
No, all very, very solid points. And I do really feel like you're hitting home on, there needs to be a ramp time for this. And there needs to be expectations set up front that this isn't just going to happen overnight within a 30-day, even a 90-day period. But Jaquanda, I would love for you to just chime in and to give your perspective on the matter as well, of maybe just like some of the missteps that you might have seen in your own experience and what advice you would give to some of the listeners.
Yeah, I mean, I want to overemphasize the lack of resources with people, budget, and infrastructure to support the work. That cannot be overstated enough. So that's number one. I think the second thing too that I had to learn as a DEI practitioner is how to get that data, which is why the transition for me to come to Diversity Window made sense, because I remembered so many years in my DEI career where I either asked for data, couldn't get it, had to figure out the different types of data. And so I had to learn how to get the data that I did have access to and use that data. Sometimes, capturing themes from, employee experiences, getting some sort of numbers around who's represented, but where they're represented within the organization. Thinking about, even for employee resource groups, they're great to have, but putting metrics around how many times are they brought in to help solve a business problem as a metric, right? And so I had to get really creative with data. And so that's number one. And I can tell you, the folks who taught me how to do that were operations leaders. Okay. I always encourage all my diversity, equity, and inclusion leaders, spend time with your operations leader, because what they taught me is like, well, I come into it very passionate, and it means a lot to me as a Black woman, right? As a Black woman in corporate spaces and the experiences I've had, as a millennial in spaces where I've been almost all the time the youngest person in the room, and not having, not being welcomed or having the space to share my perspective without being judged or people not taking me seriously, all the kind of other things, how I wear my hair, the clothes I wear, all of these things, because I didn't fit in, these spaces, right? And so to me, it's like, but I want you to see people like me, and I want you to like people like me, and I want you to understand people with people like me. And I had to learn that is not our goal. I don't need people to like me, right? I don't need people to have a change of heart. But what we do need is for people to be held accountable for how they show up within an organization as a representative of the organization, as a leader within the organization, and hold them accountable to how they keep people within the organization. So I think spending time with operations leaders, because they don't care about all that, the first thing they would ask me is, What do you need me to do? What are you trying to do? And what do you need me to do? And what do I need? What resources do I need to do it? Right? Whether it's people coming off out of a store or off a line, et cetera. Right? So I learned very quickly, I need to have very clear goals. I need to understand the resources to get there. And then I also need to understand timelines, et cetera. I think another misstep that happens when designing, especially again for DEI practitioners, is we are not pulling enough people in the room to build together. We go off, we create a plan because you're feeling the pressure from the organization to miraculously change the culture, miraculously get more, diversity in the organization. But we are not doing enough to think about what does diversity look like and mean for our particular organization, tying it to the market in which you're trying to serve. Also partnering with folks, one of the things, one of the biggest goals is, we need more diversity within the organization. As a DEI practitioner, I never owned talent acquisition. I never earned talent management or performance management, how we manage people, how we give promotions. I never owned that process. So not having a talent strategy leader in the room when I'm planning is a huge misstep. Marketing, right? How many of us have rolled our eyes like in our own organizations saying like, I love that they have all these brown faces on the website, but when I go to work, I don't see them except maybe me doing the common nod, like, oh my gosh, there's another Black person. What's up? Within an organization, but plastered on the website, right? How are you partnering with your marketing person, not just to get more representation, but also putting a strategy in place around, let's do this in a way that's authentic. So getting those key stakeholders is so important as you're building. And this is just, there's so many things, but another misstep is we don't focus enough internally. And thank you for calling that out, Maya, about building and training and developing within. A lot of people say, we want to get a recruiting strategy together. And it's like, okay, that's great. But what about the people within your organization, right? And I'm actually, I'm wrapping up a book called Plantation Theory by John Graham. And it's the Black professional struggle between freedom and security. And he talks a lot about that. And one of the ways that he articulates what's happening is we want to diversify our organizations, but we're bringing them into a burning building. Right? No, you have to do the work internally. And that's where having metrics like inclusion and belonging and assessing that along the way by population or groups, et cetera, to get a real clear understanding of how your culture is impacting people. So those are kind of the missteps, not having the right budget or infrastructure, not, designing with an operational kind of mindset around being very clear around goals, not bringing the right stakeholders, and then not looking internally to what needs to happen.
Can I just add something to the back end? So yes, big snaps, claps, cartwheels, everything you just said, Jiquanda. In that book, like I was both, so shout out to John Graham if he happens to see this, like I was both excited and mad about that book because I was like, you just telling everybody business. But it is very real, very true. To your point of not having everyone like you, I think the biggest mistake a DEI practitioner can make is to go along because they're afraid of making waves or making somebody angry. Then why are you here? And it's not saying you're supposed to go around antagonizing everyone, but things are the way they are because no one is pushing for change. So if that means someone's going to be temporarily upset or uncomfortable, guess what? They can build a bridge and get over it and it'll be fine. But you can't compromise what you know is right because you're worried, oh no, they won't like me or they won't want to work with me anymore. Then that sounds like they need to get a big dose of professionalism. And then that is justification for your next unconscious bias training about how to work through conflict. You do not make a change, not make a recommendation because you're afraid of, oh, then they're going to look at me as insert negative stereotype here. Then that's what I will be. Because if we're trying to do something different, we have to do different things. And that's not going to come by just sitting and making sure everybody's happy with the status quo.
I'm sitting here being a giant cheerleader because there's so much gold that everybody is cranking out. I mean, the comments in the actual live stream are just phenomenal. So, you know, we have Tanisha. If I butcher anybody's name, I apologize in advance. But Tanisha Walker's been throwing out some great observations. Danny Wareham has been throwing out great observations. There's a couple of things that I want to call out real quick, and this is going to be a wild card. And, you know, actually, Kelly Burns, one of my colleagues at Circa, or one of Nathan and I's colleagues at Circa, talks about the roles that operations and talent acquisition can play in building out DEI strategy. But what I want to call out is a comment by Joseph Sella. And I'm gonna hand it off to you, Jaquanda, to address this. This is something that came in, and I think it's really ground for a great discussion. And what Joseph mentions is that what I see is that leaders want diversity and think they're progress oriented, but when someone challenges the decision or questions a problematic system, it's seen as being divisive. So what advice to leaders, what advice would you share to leaders who tend to be challenged that way and maybe are feeling back down? I think I'm interpreting the question correctly, so I'm paraphrasing. Joseph, I apologize if I took some liberties in paraphrasing, but how would you advise leaders to navigate that challenge that they see on initiatives that they want to push from a DEI perspective?
Yeah, I always bring it back to the work and the plan, right? If you have a very clear, articulated plan with goals, metrics, progress, all of that, I don't get into those internal struggles. Now, have I had those? Absolutely, right? But I bring it back to the work. I bring it back to, as an organization, we have committed to increasing diversity by XYZ, right? Here is how we're getting there. And I think oftentimes we get into these struggles with people about their beliefs and everything else. It's like, have you seen society right now? So so technically you want me to change, you know, internally in the organization with this huge societal impact. I honestly don't get in the internal struggle. I bring it back to the work, and I bring it back to the goals, and I bring it back to the strategy and what we're trying to do. And honestly, that's what I do, because I've learned that, you know, and we kind of heard the percentage of people you're going to have, you know, the 20% who are very, you know, ambitious and excited and ready to jump, you know, and be on board. You have the 60% who are kind of in the middle. And then you have the other 20% who just will never support the work. But if you build it into the system and build in accountability into the system, that is where you hold people accountable to how they show up. Again, we don't need people to like us or agree with us or understand our experiences, because you just cannot. However, I can work with an organization and say, if you build this just as we have cultural values or cultural statements or any of those things, that's why when we do DEI strategy, we actually connect it. We say, you have these values, right? How does that show up from a DEI perspective? And so if you build that and taking it a step further, how do you build it into your talent management? It is our expectation that as a leader, you display these things and you are held accountable to that. And if you are not, organizations, this is an even more bold step that a lot of organizations aren't willing to do. If you are not, you will no longer be a leader at this organization, or you can't be here, because this is the culture and the expectation that we have. But you have to build it into the system or it doesn't work. So I always bring it back to the work and make sure that work is connected to the business strategy of the organization.
And I want to add on to what Jaquanda said. In the education world, we call this, as an instructional technique, we call broken record method. Once you establish that, you're a broken record. You keep saying the same thing over and over so you can fortify it. Because there's one thing to build it, but then how is it being implemented, right? So you have to be repetitive. You have to be constant, saying the same thing. The moment you sway, the moment you go a different direction, oh, I thought you said, no, you didn't think that. I said this. This is what we do, and this is how we do.
No, great point, Charles. I feel like that what comes to mind with that is repetition is persuasive, right? And when you get that clear message and continuously repeat that, that's how you get acceptance from the rest of the organization too, or at least be able to persuade a little bit.
So I think we've done a really strong job of some of the common issues or obstacles that everybody that's in the DEI space faces. So let's start getting prescriptive when we're talking about, what are the best practices from a design and launch perspective, and then how do you embed it into the culture of the organization. So those are two separate questions, but let's take the design and launch component. Jiquanda, what's your insight when it comes to that? And then we'll have both Maya and Charles jump in on that too, because like everybody on this panel, the panelists have some great experience to share. So Jiquanda, off to you when it comes to best practices on design and launch of DEI programs.
Yeah. So what we do is when people come to us and say, we want to do more around DEI or we want to create a DEI strategy, we always ask, where are you? Right? Like you can't just come in, right, and thinking that you're going to put a one size fit all to every organization, because that's not going to happen. Where are you? What data do you have? What data do you need to create, right? For example, for an organization, people may say that they're, interviewing diverse candidates. Like, look, we're bringing them here, we're interviewing them, but where are you tracking on that candidate experience where you can very clearly see where the gaps are? And usually it's when it gets to that hiring manager who still chooses not to hire diversity within the organization. So what are the systems and practices that are put in place based on data? And we ask the hard questions, right? Yes, we do data, we look at policies, all of that, right? And can say, like, when you look from who created these structures, right? This is not benefiting everybody, right? And I think, when we think about just how we navigate just systems, it's even different, right? And so much of the issue is that there have been barriers intentionally put in place to keep people out. And so how are you looking at what is happening in your systems? And then how do you start putting practices in place that dismantle, that disrupt, that builds on maybe, some people who may be taking a one step, but how do you build on that? But how do you look at the systemic thing? So again, talent management is a huge one when there is a lot of bias in that process, right? And it benefits people, but having the mechanism to track and measure what that looks like, you have to be able to track that, or you can't. And also looking at what are the folks who are in charge of really building that together. So we start with the data, ask the hard questions, and then we say, here are the gaps, here's what needs to change, and here's how you build it in. So you have to build in practices, like, for example, the talent management, right? How are we holding people accountable to that? And then from there, you have to have goals, right? Some people try to jump into it, create goals that feels good, that looks good. No, again, how do you put it? How do you align it to what your data is telling you are huge gaps within the organization? You can't just go in and say, we want to do awareness months, or, we want to do, monthly celebrations. How is that tied to the business? And how are the actions really supporting people? And then again, from there, to sustain it, how are you holding people accountable, right? And I think it's one of those things where it's a larger issue, because, when we go back to who's in power, who's making these decisions, and who keep people accountable, yes, that has to change also over time. But how do we keep people accountable within the organization? So that's what we do. We look at data. What's available, what is able to be tracked. If folks don't have things that they're tracking, we help them get a tracking mechanism in place to be able to measure it. We put action around how do you actually move the needle toward goals that you have that are actionable, that have timelines, right? That have KPIs. And then you have to hold people accountable to what they're doing. So that's kind of the broader overview of how we help folks design.
There's a lot of great takeaways in what you just said, Jiquanda. So thank you for sharing that. I think John Graham online has a brilliant comment out there to your point about how you can't out-hire a bad culture. If you're just looking at the vanity metrics, the numbers of X, Y, and Z people within your organization, without really looking at, how are you retaining people across the enterprise? How are you retaining that? That's actually the non-vanity metric that you should be looking at across all of your underrepresented groups, because that's actually where you're burning a lot of your money. Is if you're not solving for retention, nerd alert, that's like my wheelhouse. If you're not solving for retention, you're going to have problems. Maya, I want to hand off to you really quickly, because you've built a brand in your experience where you've embedded DEI as part of an organizational culture. And I think that's, I'm positive you have some best practices, because you've actually embedded DEI in a high growth startup environment and also a mature Fortune 100 environment. So when you're looking at the problem of you're looking at the question of design and deployment best practices from a DEI perspective, what have you seen that works really well?
One thing I like to start with is keeping it real. And what I mean by that is you get people who hear, oh, DEI, or, oh, you're the DEI person. And they start bringing you very random things, or they start asking for very like nondescript things. Oh, we want to diversify our team. What does that mean? Oh, we want diverse hires. Everybody's diverse. There's something different about each and every one of us. We are all diverse. You are coding your language, and I need you to be very direct with me. So who are you looking for? Do you want 3 Black people, 2 Latinx folks, and, you would, in Asian, like Southeast Asian people to join your team? Is that what you're looking for? I need you to tell me that. And then I also need you to tell me what you have done, what results you've had in the past, and also what the experiences have been on exit interviews, to you all's point about, culture. What are the identified issues for the people who have left your team? What are they? What were some themes that were there? Oh, we didn't measure it. Oh, well, I need you to start measuring before you start trying to bring people into an environment that is not suited for them, or does not allow them to bring their best to the table, because you're setting them up for failure. And I will not help facilitate bringing people into an uncomfortable environment, and then it turns around and becomes my problem when they're uncomfortable or unhappy. It's everybody's job to foster an inclusive environment, and just going out and picking people and putting them in the room just so you have the numbers is not going to solve it. And I will not support that whatsoever. And, if you got a problem, see me outside. But we are not going to do that. We're not just going to start putting people in just to have it. The other side, again, is veiled language. When people come and have an issue and say, oh, I'm not sure, I wonder how diverse employees experience the workplace. Who are you talking about? Who are you worried about? And what elements do you think need to be amended, adjusted, or identified that may make being in an environment uncomfortable for certain people? And who are those people? Please let me know this, instead of the blanket, very, very, all over the place. Oh, it doesn't help. You're not helping me. Be specific in your ask so that we can make sure that we are solving the problem and creating a strategy that will be long-term, instead of it being a quick fix, and tying it back into the work that we do. So don't tell me you want to get more people from a certain demographic in the building and I can't work with talent acquisition, or there's no person who focuses on building relationships with organizations outside of, the ones that you typically go to get talent. Or I saw a comment there about internal networks, and yes, about that. If you only hire your uncle, your cousin, your godbrother, and whoever else to come into the door, and then wonder why you have a very monochromatic workforce, maybe look at how you're hiring. Are you here quite simply to put your family on, or are you looking for the best talent and willing to get outside of your box and going to have the bravery, if you're the leader of an organization, or even still just even in talent acquisition, to say, no, they are not qualified. while it's wonderful that they would love to join our ranks, they may not be the best candidate. So chances are they may not make it to the final round or get the job. And having the bravery to say that, knowing that it may not make people happy. And that's okay if that is not our goal. So just being very clear about what the goals are and not being afraid to go to leadership. If you're in that position of being the head of diversity, going to leadership and saying, I need to know what success looks like from you. Because if we have two different definitions and I'm working one way and you're countering my work, you're wasting my time.
Great stuff, Maya. I know that Jaquanda has something that she wanted to add to that, and I know that Charles has something to add as well, because this is a great conversation. Our comments are blowing up, so fantastic discussion. Keep it up. Jaquanda, floor is yours.
Gosh, I got to open the comments. But no, I just wanted to add to that, all what Maya was saying, like going back to how you operationalize that, like you need data to do that because it's happening all the time, right? So kind of to what I spoke to earlier, when you think about the experiences within the organization, there's no way to track or measure that, right? And so you have to put metrics around that. You have to look at, again, when I said earlier about how do you focus internally, you have to put metrics around, again, who's represented, not only who's represented and where, but also who's getting, what are the promotion rates, right? What are the performance management, like looking at equity and performance management and ratings, looking at why are people are diverse, again, I use air quotes, why is diversity leaving the organization at what rates? Looking at inclusion and belonging and how people feel about equity, right? In terms of opportunities or what they see as fair in terms of promotions, et cetera, right? And looking at the differences across your diversity. And so, really being able to pull data around that is really key so that you can have the data to show it, again, to build it into the systems. Because if we're not changing the system, we're just going to keep doing the same work because you're not, it's the system that actually perpetuates this. And the system was created for many of us who are in the workspace now, who weren't when it was created.
Charles, I want to make sure that you have your say in this because you're coming from sort of a different domain, having been in education. So what have you seen in terms of being effective or as being effective when you're thinking about design and launch of DEI programs in your domain?
Everything that Jaquanda and Maya has said already. At the end of the day, none of this stuff is really rocket science. But what it is like Jaquanda just stated, you got to have your data to inform your work. Next, you have to distribute the ownership of this work. It just can't rest in the laps of Maya and Jaquanda to carry an entire organization. We have to own it. So once the framework is built, once the structure is in place for how do we apply diversity, how do we apply equity, how do we apply inclusion in all of our work, then we spread it out to the leaders in the various departments and then teach them and show them how this should resonate and be replicated throughout the organization, right? Because using this data, I used to use in my schools and even my current organization, we use this to craft the communication so that we are avoiding tokenism. Like Maya stated earlier about be clear in who you want to hire, but in that clarity, why? Why do you want 3 Black folks, 2 Asians, 1 Latinx? This is not McDonald's. This is not a fast food order. Be specific on understanding that whatever the need is that your business is aspiring to achieve, will this perspective and the talent that this individual bring help us meet our goal? You just don't want them on there, just like you say, for the website. And like Jaquanda said, I come to your organization and, here I am where they are, right? When I joined my organization, I knew I was going to be the only brother at the place. But I went in with the mindset that they need my talent. They need my expertise. This is why they hired me. However, when we're doing when I joined the DEI task force, I went in with the understanding that if we're reaching other schools across the country, why are we only focused on predominantly white rural schools? We have Black rural schools. We got Latinx rural schools. We even got indigenous, our native folks. They have rural schools all across our territory. So why aren't we going after them? And if we go after them, we're going to need talent on our team who can speak to those communities. So again, my broken record theme is intentional culture. How are we intentional when we strategizing our plan to meet our business need? And in doing so, when you're having those hard conversations, be a broken record so that we aren't susceptible to tokenism.
All great points, Charles. As we wind down the show, I did want to ask the panel just one final question, and I wanted to ask everyone, what are your thoughts on keeping DEI evergreen, ongoing with the organization, keeping it top of mind? What would you give some of the listeners out there for that question?
We need more platforms like this. Share it within our organizations. Like my favorite term, be a broken record, and own your truth. I like when Maya said, be real. For people of color in corporate America and even other industries, we find it difficult to be real because there can be some consequences in being real. But if we really want to effect change, it's necessary.
Evergreen. Keep your ear to the ground and keep in contact with your people. And that goes across levels because the needs are going to evolve as they should. And the only way to make sure that needs are being met and issues are being addressed is if you are in contact and you're aware of what is happening instead of just, doing the same thing over and over again and then expecting that it's always going to work. Things change, people change, situations change, environments change. Keep up with that.
Yeah. And I think for me, again, just going back to it has to be an actionable, clear plan. And you have to think about ways that you are addressing and attacking the system, which is the culture, technically, in which the organization in which you are in, because culture eats strategy for breakfast every single time. So if you're not building in, and when I say attacking and addressing the culture is looking at the different systems, breaking down those barriers, and also holding people accountable to that, right? It's huge, massive change because again, when we look at the workplaces that have been created, they did include all of us within the organization, right? And so you have to make sure that it is a clear plan, that you're also addressing the culture and that it's actionable so that folks can be held accountable.
Great discussion. And, I think this could be like a 4-hour show, but I know all of you have things to do besides listening to me running my mouth. So thank you so much for joining us. Before we sign off, I want to make sure that each of you has an opportunity to share one critical takeaway that the audience can walk away with. So Maya, I'm going to start with you, and your takeaway cannot be Notre Dame football is the worst. So that's off the table. What is the key takeaway that you want people to understand as they walk away from this discussion?
Well, I mean, it's a no-brainer that Notre Dame football is the worst. Like everybody knows that. That's fine. Yes, fight on. SC all day. One takeaway, just own it. Is cheesy as it is, be the change. Yeah, be the change you want to see. Advocate, speak up, ask the questions, ask for what you want, because you won't get it otherwise.
I mean, I think your point about being an advocate for yourself is phenomenal. Jaquanda, same question to you.
If you're asked to lead this work or to do it, don't do it without money or resources. And whatever your budget is, that's the work that you produce. I'm sorry, right? It may feel but I use this example all the time when I'm out with my kids and they ask for Starbucks. I ask them how much money they have. They say $1 or $2. You have Dollar Tree money. So we're going to go. You're going to be happy. Pick your $2 Tree prices, things out, and we'll be happy. But you cannot do more in which the organization you are in is willing to do.
Great point. Charles?
Use your data to be clear, specific, intentional, and real.
That I think Jaquanda gave another 50 snaps on that one. Nicely done there, Charles. I want to thank everybody on this panel for such a phenomenal conversation. For those of you who have been viewing or watching this segment, and there's been a phenomenal amount of conversation and comments that have been going on the feed. Thank you so much for being engaged and driving the conversation forward. Our panelists were phenomenal. I want to make sure that those of you who are watching and listening, make sure you connect with them on LinkedIn, follow them on all their platforms. Yes, I'm inviting everybody to get in your business. So sorry, not sorry. You have to know these folks. They are great people to have in your network and really strong advocates. So it's been a pleasure. And Nathan and I both thank you so much for your generosity when it comes to time, your insights.
Awesome.
I think it was a phenomenal conversation. Thank you so much. This will be replaying on an ongoing basis on the LinkedIn live feed, so you can catch the recording if you weren't able to catch it live. Check out the comments. There's some phenomenal activity in the comments section. John Graham is just blowing stuff up with so much insight that's in there. There's so many other folks that have had so much to share that's been valuable. So really well done. And I think for those of you who are interested, every week Nathan and I will be bringing some of the best practitioners across the talent strategy spectrum on a number of topics every Friday at 12:30. I encourage you to follow us on the Talent Strategy 60 page. We are both active advocates and evangelists for DEI in our roles at Circa. So definitely check out what we're doing from there. But the net, if I'm taking all of everything that's been said, is that if you're looking to transform DEI, you have to take a people, process, and technology approach to it, and you have to put budget, you have to measure, and you have to be accountable. Don't be performative about this. And I'm stealing like everybody else's catchphrases, so sorry, but it has to be said out loud. Thank you so much for the insights, and join us next time on Talent Strategy 60.